My problem with video games, Fire Emblem Three Houses. If you've known me for longer than 3 seconds, then you could probably surmise that I am extremely picky with video games. For a very long time, I thought it was just me. With the past few years, however, I've grown quiet about my opinions. However, I've recently found myself in communities for games and franchises I like, and oh boy, have the times changed. I remember whenever I bring up Marth to someone, they'd be like, oh, that weird guy in Melee. Now in 2020, it seems like the fandom is real, but they aren't fans of yet another amazing strategy game franchise, but rather the characters. Also, for a disclaimer, I love Fire Emblem games. I rank it right up there with Shining Force, XCOM, and a buttload of others. That's why it hurts me to see the direction the series is going. Also, I'll be leaving some of my other, more personal gripes for the end of the video. So stay tuned, get your salt shakers ready, and let's dive into this. I can already smell the hate permeating from the fanboys. Oh friggin' well. Before I get into anything else, the most blaring problem with Three Houses is its overall dev cycle. Again, if you've known me for more than 3 seconds, then you know that I will often drag publishers, presidents of game companies, and overambitious marketing teams. So let's start with Genki Yokota. If you're unfamiliar with him, he directed the games for Fire Emblem Awakening, Fire Emblem Fates, Fire Emblem Echoes, as well as all the Xenoblade Chronicle games. Now, for most people, they would go, "But Salty, all those were good games." And to that I say, no, they could have been some of the most played in Honor games of all time, had the production speed and focus not changed so much. For instance, Fire Emblem Three Houses was originally a 3DS title. You can feel it in the overworld and character design. It's similar to how the Cyber Sleuth video games felt like nothing but PS Vita ports on other consoles. Genki admitted that the development was abruptly switched to the Switch, no pun intended, as well as released a whole 2 years earlier than expected. According to an interview from the 2019 issue of Famitsu, Genki says, roughly, they wanted to release a Fire Emblem game for the Nintendo Switch at the latest by 2019, but found this would not be possible with their usual development approach, and so looked for a developer that could help shorten their process. Already, we can see the red flags, but you know, Fire Emblem is a pretty flagship series and franchise for Nintendo at this point, so they wouldn't do the, oh no. Genki adds, Warriors was still in development at this time, and when they consulted Koei Tecmo's Hayashi Yosuke on this, he introduced them to the Shibusawa co-brand team, which is famous for having decades of experience working on war simulation games like Nobunaga's Ambition and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Kusha Kihara says that they altered the plans for the game accordingly to the Shibusawa co-brand strength, with things like the setting being about a balance between 3 countries coming together after they decided to work with them. Years of experience? You mean the Dynasty Warrior games that promptly fell out of favor over a decade ago because of dry releases and rehashes of the same game? What about the garbage Ninja Gaiden games that have been flooding the market for yes, the last 13 plus years? Dead or Alive, the last Marvel Ultimate Alliance games? Now what about Metroid Other M? Yes, this is the man that thought it was okay to lead Other M in that direction. I'm not even going to plague this video with imagery from that game. Not focusing on it too hard, Metroid Other M is the epitome of what is wrong with, or at least what I find wrong with video games. Here's the formula. Silly Americans don't like challenging games, but they love plots equivalent to a B sci-fi action movie from the 80s. Female characters that can be over-sexualized, are not intimidating, and easily waifu'd. Also, remove all pangs of difficulty. We don't want to scare the babies. Yes, we need a team with such game developing prowess. Actually, this man didn't work on any formal Dynasty Warriors game, just clones. So the bit in the interview about having someone on board with experience with Romance of the Three Kingdoms games was poop in a chute. The same Koei Tecmo team that worked on Fire Emblem Warriors mostly worked on Three Houses with only minor support from Intelligent Systems. BS aside, this probably has a lot to do with them already having made a 3D Fire Emblem game on the Switch, it would ultimately cut down the dev time, since they could just reuse the game engine instead of coming up with one of their own. It's cheaper, and when you want to pump out some flagship games, well, here you go. I also noticed a fair bit of features have been watered down from echoes or completely misshapen, like the overworld mechanics, gag me, and the freedom of character design as far as stats are concerned. Now that I got that off of my chest, explain why this shouldn't have ever been considered a mainline game, just as an attempt to milk a cash cow, cue Garbo mobile games. However, I am nowhere near finished with this heaping pile of trash. In a typical salty fashion, I want to get to the aspects of the game that I like before I start chewing the game out in a new segment I like to call, I'm really trying here. This Fire Emblem game has probably the largest cast of characters, and you get a lot of freedom with how you build them. I think that the limited pool of buildable characters in Echoes was a bit more organic, especially coming from a much older game. However, I was able to speed through the game with pretty much any character I wanted. They gave me a lot of support and stat buffs that can turn any bad RNG stat gain into absolutely not an issue at all, which is kinda cool for super casual playthroughs or maybe even 100% runs that don't require you to play the game more than once. Nope, gotta scratch that whole lie. I just lied to you. I'm sorry for lying to you. I'm really trying here. I like that Nintendo okayed the non-typical male-female pairings, but also did not allow it to overtake the plot. Unfortunately, you'll see why I say this a bit later, Claude is the first black, not counting Micaiah or Ike because I'm pretty sure they're either from the Balkan area of Europe, Crimea being a real place and all, or vaguely from the Middle East, Lord characters, as well as characters like Eldengard who does not suffer from, I need a man, or I'm a sass lady but I'm morbidly obsessed with this man, that they do in most other Fire Emblem titles for leading female characters. Representation? Nope, not here later, not here, not in this section, my guy. I also like that you don't have to be stuck with Lord characters you have no interest in. You could get by with playing one of the houses and nothing else. Okay, that about wraps it up. It's time to chew the fudge rounds out of this game. I cannot wait. I've been waiting for this. Storyline. This is perhaps my biggest issue with the game. More than the bugs that I don't care enough to see if they patched out, or why Byleth is wearing leggings. The pacing, the direction, the focus, all these components were lacking. I remember the day I was streaming Three Houses for the first time. I was so excited, but the excitement faded during the hour plus of plot dumping. For games like this, plot dumping as well as forcing players to endure through several chapters of unskippable tutorial maps would make a lot of people put the game down, more so than the difficulty. Wait, I gotta stay focused here. I gotta stay focused here. I gotta save the game design for last. Focus, my man. I can do a better job than Yokota. I get it. Because he didn't do any of those things very well at all. I went into the game with no spoilage, hoping to not come into the game with bias. However, the setting was absolutely abysmal. The game felt like a dating sim with some strategy elements. You really cannot get the whole story without playing the game more than once, but why should you? The plot is predictable and some of the characters' motivation, like Eldengard, makes absolutely no sense. I honestly think that the first 12 chapters should have been cut down to maybe just the tutorial maps. I understand them wanting the player to develop attachments to characters pre-time skip so that certain events would be more impactful. The church is misguiding, the empire is bad, but politics stays any progressive movements and everyone shuts up until the very last moment, blah blah blah. If Eldengard would have opened her mouth at any point, then half of this riveting plotline would have been abated. For the record, I think the storytelling in Fire Emblem games is more interesting than the characters themselves. You typically will learn a lot about what's going on, about the boss, or what their motivation is in a quick pre-map synopsis. It fits perfectly for a wartime piece like this. Much like most FE games that features an avatar unit, Three Houses does an even worse job justifying your character's existence. Plot dump, you are now a professor and it's gonna take your students a week to warm up to you, or you could just wait until the time skip. Plot dump. None of it mattered beforehand anyway. What I was expecting to see was more than just characters like Dedu sticking with Dimitri in the future, that if you neglected a character from your house, they would either defect or go home. This further adds to the poor pacing and scatteredness of the game. It doesn't really feel like anything you do matters outside of what side you pick. The dialogue feels really stiff, and the usual couple of lines that I would pick up from a Fire Emblem game is void. I mean, to be fair, in order to run through the game like 8 or 9 times, I skipped a lot of the bloat. In fact, you can skip most of the cutscenes and still know exactly what's happening. Also, things like Dimitri going undetected for years makes no sense when he's been 1v100ing enemies since he was alone. You'd think somebody would have mentioned that. Speaking of Dimitri, my hope for this game was briefly ignited during the time skip. Having been traumatized by war and indoctrination, I thought we would get a chance for Dimitri to slowly return to his old form or into a more independent character. But no, that reasonable change of character lasted a total of 1 chapter. Then all of a sudden, like nothing happened, he's good old static Dimitri with no plot development and questionable motivation. Ah, the classic. In terms of gameplay, Three Houses is by far my least favorite Fire Emblem game. The overworld is the easiest target. They took my least favorite gameplay mechanic from SMT Persona games, that's 3 to 5, and slapped it in there for some reason. The calendar cycle is the reason why I had to play this game through more than 3 times. All the little things you do with the characters get redundant, and why I couldn't maybe micromanage all the facilities from my room, ? I mean, the overworld is so empty they implemented fast traveling. Echoes did a much better job at adding the overworld. There was a mix of storytelling, gameplay, and control implemented in Echoes. To make matters worse, despite appearing to give you a lot of control, you hamper yourself by not doing all the overworld garbage, which includes, but not limited to, eating, fishing, praying, even with the church's bad people, planting, and other things I would expect from a social game or a dating sim. All this bloat did was irritate me further. I either did some runs where I invested no time into any of those things, and guess what? Outside of that horrific maddening mode, they made no difference, but I can see how supplementing that in for newer players stopped a lot of potential hard-locked runs. The annoying thing is that I could just use 2 units and teach everyone else, and that's it. Good game. Easy little squeeze. With that, I will now be segueing into the difficulty of the game. It's not. You have the decade new casual mode, which is probably the leading factor to the franchise's revitalization. Nope, it didn't help. People still thought Awakening was too hard, even with all the handicaps. They give you everything you need in the game so you can focus on everything else besides the actual gameplay. The weapons, especially the ancient ones, make the game a breeze. They took the success of Echoes and said people wanted more anime moves, more inventory slots, and less of a challenge. I cannot understand the reasoning of some people. How do you pick up a game not to play it at all? I'm not joking. A lot of fans get extremely butthurt and say interesting comments like, the gameplay is secondary to the characters. But in an FE game, all those components work around the gameplay. The map design was extremely lazy and very easily exploitable. The addition of support units over pairing was refreshing, but they could have done better with the scaling of the potency of those attacks. It's too strong. It sucks because I think it adds to the flair of the FE combat system, but due to the legendary crouch, I think playtesting for this game was non-existent. However, I never exclusively play games on hard mode. They had a DLC difficulty that came out near launch, but if you know me, I hate those. They added in post-production. That means that unless you get blessed with some amazing RNG, they expect you to play that difficulty after you beat the game. All they did was buff enemy stats. The AI doesn't get any smarter. The conditions of the maps don't really change. They don't hinder your ability to force characters to grow out of combat. They just dump more units on the map and buff their stats. The first 6 chapters on a clean run on maddening mode are the most difficult part of the game. That includes the tutorial maps. When people ask for difficult games, that's not what they mean, and heckin' is heck, not what I meant either. I believe this game has some atrocious visual design. You could look at the character models and tell that many of them are rehashed with swamped hair, eyes, and clothing. Most of the characters' faces are damn near identical, and it makes it very uncanny. Their faces are also emotionless, which is fine. Not all video games need face capture. But you would think with all the extra focus on those one-dimensional characters, their facial expressions would be more expressive? Again, I hate to reference Echoes constantly, but that was a flippin' 3DS game. I love how Clive's face was always so pained. You can see his anxiety. It makes it less random that he shifts responsibility to It feels like they wanted to dump in a bunch of characters so they could say they had the largest FE cast, not the most fleshed out one. Also, the game is very, very gray and dark and brown. Nothing really stands out about the setting. Now don't get me wrong, nobody wants a colorful war game, but visually, the game looks very washed out. The cutscenes only look a little better than the ones they had in Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn. The voice cast? It's okay. Not much to really complain about there. The sound design in general is just okay. Not something that I would expect for a Fire Emblem game. Hell, even Fates had some awesome sound effects and soundtrack design. That isn't something that would have ruined the game for me though, just a minor annoyance. Finally, the biggest gripe I have with the game design, non-aesthetically, were the earlier parts of the game. They spend too much time explaining things and forcing you to indulge in boring maps that your dad mansplains really basic concepts to you, and the first few times out in the overworld is a hand-holding nightmare. Thank God for skippable cutscenes. Also, the representation for non-white looking characters is saddening. All I got from the dude's character is that he's a slave that gets pooped on for being a slave. You don't think he's a slave? Well, in your free time, you should look up the history of slavery and indoctrination. Also, the fact that no one cares that Petra is quite literally a groomed prisoner of war. That doesn't gross you out? Probably not, because you're she's exotic. You think she's exotic. That's not weird, totally. Rolls eyes in text. My opinion? This game should have gotten delayed until 2020. Instead of focusing on getting the game out fast and cheap, instead of outsourcing the job to an incompetent dev team, they should have taken their time with this grand project. Like, this is one of those games that I hate that it sucks. You can see where maybe they wanted to expand on a concept, whether it's a plot line or a gameplay mechanic, but they just couldn't, because it felt rushed. I left out things like characters appearing in cutscenes they're not supposed to be in, T-posing and very awkward conversations. The paralogs do nothing to make me care more about the characters in this game, and they chose some of the least interesting characters to revolve them around. I say they should have cut the roster in half, cut the pre-time skip stuff in half, and maybe incorporated house-specific chapters more early on in the game, to maybe add to the "I ain't close to these nerds" thing they tried to go for. Honestly, this game made me appreciate Fire Emblem Awakening more because you can feel the attempt at least in that game. Also, your character is much older than the students in Three Houses. I think the fact that you can romance them is gross. This is by far my least favorite Fire Emblem game. It's not the worst video game, but it's pretty down there in terms of quality Fire Emblem games. Definitely. And thanks everybody for watching. I really needed to get a lot of this off of my chest. I don't really have a platform to complain about this game, and it kind of sucks. However, I did go out of my way to avoid major plot points. So if certain areas of this, especially the ones involving talking about characters and storylines and stuff, I didn't want to hear like spoilers, and my video gets taken down by Nintendo because it's showing spoilers for a game that's like over a year old. But out of respect for that, I left out some pivotal plot points. You can leave a comment if you want. If you like what you saw, stuff always makes you feel better. But if you disagree, I will 100% assure you that I will totally read that paragraph comment that you have about why Eldengard is the best waifu of all times and how shitty my opinions are. In actuality though, if you could disagree with my points and swallow your pride in a well-written fashion, I'd be more than willing to engage in a conversation about this game. But guys, for real, for serious, this is the most serious thing in this video. Make sure you get something to eat. Make sure you brush your teeth. Make sure you get a good night of sleep. But above all else, stay salty, my guys. Now go play more video games so you have more things to compare the garbage video games like Three Houses to. Like, you don't need to be here. Like, just go. Like, just complain to me in my DMs like everyone else always does anyway. Just do it. Just do it. Please.